So I've just finished watching the first part of the three-part Beatles Get Back documentary by Peter Jackson, and I absolutely love it so far. It makes me feel a lot of things. It's a very, very emotional work. I think my biggest takeaway from what I've seen so far is the Beatles' songwriting process. That is to say, it's mostly like the struggles they go through. So it is really emotional and gratifying and humanizing to see a band that you've come to love so much. Like, I've learned all of their songs. I've studied their songs like crazy. They're probably the band I've spent the most time learning their songs inside and out. And to see how they get to that place where they get those songs is really humbling. So the thing is, what you know as a songwriter is that it takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears and really just hard work to get a song to a good place. Most of the time. Sometimes you'll get a song that just happens out of thin air, like Paul did with Get Back, where you just get a song that just feels right and it's amazing. But I'd say that happens like 1 every 10 good songs you write, approximately, unless you're really, really lucky. The other 9 out of 10 songs, you gotta like work at it and chisel away and find the song that's kind of hidden. It's almost like working on a block of ice. It's just utterly surreal to see the Beatles go through the exact same thing. I assumed that's what they went through. I assumed it, but I never actually knew it. I remember years ago, my good friend and bandmate, he told me he wished he could hear Kevin Parker's voice memos. Like, of all the songs that didn't make it onto Lonerism and Currents and whatever, because we know as songwriters, we have dozens and dozens of just random voice memos on our phone that never become songs. Just random melodies we wake up in the middle of the night and we hear, or you're driving around and you whistle something that you think sounds good. And you always kind of hope like, oh, maybe I can turn this into a song. But 90% of them you just never do anything with. And I remember my friend saying, like, I want to hear that side of Kevin Parker. I want to hear the ideas he doesn't think are good, because maybe they're actually really good ideas. But what I found really interesting about this documentary so far is that some of the ideas aren't good. You hear the Beatles kind of play songs and play fragments of songs that are just okay. Or, importantly, you hear them play really, really great songs, but bad parts to these really great songs. There's a couple things I want to say about John's Don't Let Me Down. So he comes to the group with the song, and they all clearly like the song. And the thing is, when you're writing songs together as a band, most of the time you get the song kind of like 3/4 of the way there. 2/3, 3/4. Like, you have the verse, the chorus, you have a chunk of lyrics, you have maybe an idea of what the song's going to be about. And they're like, okay, this is good enough. Let me take it to the band and we'll flesh it all out from there. So they're working on Don't Let Me Down. And then there's these really corny harmonies during, what is the verse, I think? Or maybe it's the bridge. I'm in love for the first time. It's that part. And Paul is just really trying to hammer away at these harmonies. And he's like, well, if we do it like this, it won't sound corny. If we do it like that, it might not sound corny. And they just keep going and going. And you can see in John's eyes the sort of existential crisis that's happening. And maybe I'm projecting, but it just seems to me like John is watching his song die in front of his eyes. Because I've had that happen before. I've come to my band with songs where the song is good and we know it's good and we want the song to exist and be as good as possible, but then just nothing ever seems to click, and then you bang your head against the wall and you keep going at it and it never works, and you're just sitting there like, oh my God, is this song dying right now? Is it gone? It's not going to exist? And every band member wants the same thing. They all want a good song. So it's not like they're deliberately destroying it, and everyone tries out their own ideas and sees what can work. Again, I might be projecting a little on John, but just watching him kind of stare wide-eyed, and he doesn't even provide any ideas. They keep hammering away at it. Paul's like, oh, we'll try this harmony, we'll try that harmony, we'll try this thing, that thing. And John doesn't argue with him, but he doesn't provide any ideas of his own. So my takeaway from that is that John was out of ideas. And Paul even says to him, like, well, this was always kind of the weak part when you played it on the acoustic guitar. It was always sort of a weak part. And man, if I had heard that as a songwriter, I would have been a little crushed. The guitar part, the dun 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 dun, that part is what really makes it. But they hadn't come up with that yet. They kept trying these counterpoint harmonies that were really corny. And I'm glad those harmonies didn't stick. That's the other thing. The beautiful thing about seeing their process is you see all of these ideas that are just bad. They're just not good ideas. You hear Don't Let Me Down with these corny harmonies and you're like I'm so glad that didn't make it into the song because the song just wouldn't have been as good. And they made those decisions too. They all said, you know what? No, we're going to scrap these harmonies. I feel so privileged to watch them work like this. So next I want to talk about the moment everyone's talking about in part one, which is Paul just plucking Get Back out of thin air. He's strumming his bass. It's not even a guitar. There's not even chords. He's just strumming a bass. And he's just strumming 2 chords. And then he just starts moaning like he's channeling a spiritual energy or something. And he starts moaning. And he gets it. And John isn't there yet because he showed up late. George and Ringo are just sitting there. They're just letting this happen. Obviously, the Beatles were intimately familiar with each other at that point. To do that in a band where you're just sitting there and he's really just doing utter nonsense. People who aren't in the band, potential onlookers, the public or something, might look at that and be like, what's going on? That's kind of crazy. That's weird. But none of them cared. In fact, I bet Ringo and George had seen that happen before. So they're just sitting there and they're just watching Paul create a song. All of the Beatles just being completely, utterly goofy characters, singing songs, because they rehearse these songs day in and day out for hours on end, and just seeing them completely mangle and bossa songs and sing out of tune and just sing with different colors and timbres. They're just always experimenting and goofing off. It's so fun to watch. You have to keep that spirit alive too, or else it's just, the writing session is just going to get boring and everyone's going to kind of hate it. So going back to that existential crisis thing, I think it was I Got a Feeling that Paul was working on. And they're sitting there working on the song, and then, Paul and George have that big fight, that everyone talks about. I think what was happening inside Paul was the same thing that was happening to John with Don't Let Me Down, where this kind of existential crisis was happening. It was like, I have this song, I know it's a good song, but it sounds like crap. What's happening here? That happens so much when you're in a band. Having a good song and it sounds like crap, that happens all the time. And you almost think, like, as you get better and better at writing songs and better at taking ideas and putting them into songs and trying out ideas and putting other ones aside, you almost think, like, that's never going to happen again. Okay, I got the song, it's a good song, I know it's going to sound like. But it seemed to me in that moment that Paul was feeling the same feelings I've felt before. Even though he had, 150 songs under his belt. How many hundreds of songs had Paul written? And then, Lennon McCartney by that point. 250 songs maybe. And they still have those same struggles. It's really, really humanizing to watch them like that. Paul has this argument with George because the parts aren't to his liking or whatever. And I think what happened was just a miscommunication. Paul says to George, like, listen, lads, we don't know our parts. We don't know what's going on. We can't play this song properly. Like, we need to figure out what we're going to play. George says, I do this my way. I just play the song over and over again. I keep playing and playing until I figure it out. And that's how I figure out the song. And there are definitely band members who are like that. And they're two people that just have, like, different ideas. They want to get to the same spot. They just have different ways of getting there. And one of them's frustrated by the other's way. And then Paul says, someone's got to be this guy. And it's true. John is just kind of quiet. I'm surprised at how quiet John is. He basically is just quiet. And then when he's not, he just says random nonsensical stuff, I guess. I guess he was on a bunch of drugs at this point. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if he was doing heroin or what was going on, but he was obviously cogent enough to play the songs really well, and he was there. But he just seemed like kind of a quiet, almost brooding sort of character. And then Ringo was quiet, but always ready to go. And George was just always sort of reserved. So Paul, he was right. He had to be the guy to keep things moving along. They had a deadline. They had all this stuff going on. He had to keep it moving because someone has to be. So I don't blame Paul for being bossy at all. You know, to his credit, even though Paul was bossy, he was clearly willing to spend hours in the studio just goofing off and playing random songs and doing whatever. So Paul has his two sides of him that are just always in existence. I also like seeing the amount of songs that didn't make the cut. For all the stuff that made the Get Back sessions and made the rooftop concert and Let It Be, it's like there's another amount of songs that just didn't even make it. But I think it makes sense. Like John's really political song, I don't remember what it's called. It's like, this just doesn't really fit. It doesn't make sense. And I haven't gotten to the part where they probably put the kibosh on it. But I'm sure they all agree, like, it doesn't really fit. And the same thing with some of George's songs, they don't fit. But then some of George's songs do fit. Like, I Me Mine fits really well. It's just crazy the amount of songs they had all the time. Just so many songs. So many to the point that they're like, well, you know, this one maybe we'll do later. So it's like these dudes decide to write, 14 songs in 2 weeks or whatever it is. And they probably actually write like 20 at least. And it's mind-boggling. It's truly mind-boggling watching these songwriters work. So all of these struggles that you see the Beatles go through, those are like really intense feelings of dread. At least they were for me, and I'm pretty sure they were for my band members too. But when you come out on the other side and you have a song that you've all created together and you've all put your stamp on in a really good way, there's very little that's as rewarding as that. It is an incredible feeling. There's a blog post I wrote some years ago about how me and my bandmates wrote Song for Syd. And so I detailed that whole co-creative process. And I reread that the other day, and it reminded me of all this Beatles stuff a lot. So I'm gonna put that in the link down below, because I think it's good for people to understand the magic of co-writing a song together, especially with people who see eye to eye, but bring their own ideas to the table. I don't think there's anything better or more rewarding that I've ever done in my music career than completing a song or even a whole record that you're all satisfied with, and by the end of it, you almost don't even know who wrote it. That's when it's really, really good. When like I have a song that's clearly mine, it's my lyrics, I wrote the structure and all that stuff, but by the time it's done with the arrangement and the sound design and all that stuff, some parts you're just like, I don't know who wrote that. There are a couple songs I'll link down below where Ninos and I had these arrangement ideas, and I might write part of the arrangement and then try out something else, and I just wouldn't like it. I'm like, I don't really know what else to do. So, but that first part would stick, and then he would go from there and add his own idea. So before you know it, we have like a string part that's been written by both of us, and it couldn't have possibly happened any other way. And that's really magical. So by the end, it's my song, but whom it's arranged by, it's impossible to tell. And I can tell that's what happened with the Beatles, especially as they're all moving around different instruments. So I noticed when Paul was doing Maxwell's Silver Hammer that George was playing the bass part on the Fender Bass 6. And so I was like, wait, did George write the bass part for Maxwell's Silver Hammer? Now it's possible, I'm sure Beatles fans probably already know this actually, but it's possible Paul wrote the part on the piano and then told George what to play. It wasn't very clear in the documentary, but it got me thinking like, well, I guess it is possible that George wrote the bass part for Maxwell's Silver Hammer. When all those creative juices are flowing together where there's no ego, that's the thing. There was no ego in any of that stuff. Yeah, of course there's George feeling sidelined and Paul having to be the boss, but that's not really the ego I'm talking about. What I mean is when everyone in the band just wants the song to be as good as possible, and when everyone's a multi-instrumentalist too. You might have like a guitar part going, and then the other guitarist says, oh, can you try this? Let me sit down, let me try the guitar part. And the first guitarist needs to relinquish that duty, be like, yeah, go ahead, try it out, see what you can get. Because what we just want is the song to be as good as possible. So if the second guitarist ends up writing something that's even better, the first guitarist is like, yeah, I'm gonna play that. Like, it's not about my part. It's not about what I do. It's about what the song needs. And like Paul referenced with Hey Jude, if the song doesn't need acoustic guitar right here, then it doesn't. Because when that acoustic guitar comes in, it sounds really good. And I'm sure they all knew that. It's really inspiring. I think every young songwriter who's starting out now, it should be an absolute requirement that they watch this documentary, because this is the real deal. This is what it's like being in a band, especially the amount of goofing off. If you're in a band and you're all friends with each other, the goofing off is through the roof, and the morale is way up when you goof off. So you can kind of goof off for a while and then get back to work, and it's a lot of fun. But you know, the Beatles got paid to goof off, so good for them. Anyway, I'm looking forward to part 2. I'm kind of staggering it because I'm watching it with my friends and my old bandmates. We're just having a good time watching it all together and looking at the gear and just relating to our own experiences. It's been very emotional so far. This is probably like the most amount of feelings I've had toward the Beatles in a very long time. It's kind of special knowing that this is really the one we're going to get, because I don't think they did anything like this for any of their other records that I know of, but I might be wrong. So anyway, I look forward to part 2 and adding my opinions then. Thank you.